My name is Mathieu Jouve-Villard, and I'm going to speak to you today about negotiating across cultures. Unlike how it sounds, it's actually not just a professional subject for me, it's also a very personal one. Because I live in India, I'm French, born in France, but my parents started working in India when I was just a kid, and I came here for the first time when I was 6 years old and never stopped coming since then. So I've actually been coming to India every year for the last 45 years. When I was a teenager, I worked as a summer job as a local guide in Kashmir and Ladakh, where the travel agency of my parents was located. And that was amazing for me. I have memories that I really cherished of that time. Which is also why when a French company proposed to send me to India, I gladly accepted. So when I finished my business studies, I was posted in New Delhi in 1994, and for the last 27 years, I've been living and working here. It's been quite an adventure for me. I've had multiple jobs. I worked for a defense company. I've been an importer and distributor of wines. And around 20 years ago, I started working with a consultancy company and helping foreign companies invest and develop their business in India. Now, in those missions, I did a lot of things. I did market research. We identified mergers and acquisition targets, real estate deals. But the most difficult part of the job for me was definitely negotiation. Because when people found themselves, or at least perceived themselves, as being on two different sides, there really the cultural issues tended to blow up and became really challenging to manage. And when it comes to cultural differences, India is up there. Because the truth is that we're not used anymore to meet real difference. And India is not just another continent, it's another planet altogether. Today, most of the Western world and beyond consumes more or less the same cultural products. We tend to read the same books, listen to the same music, watch the same movies. India is very different. An average Indian listens to Indian music, wears Indian clothes, wears Indian ethnic jewelry, watches Indian movies. We all know that India is the largest producer of movies in the world. Eats Indian food, and even spirituality is oddly specific. 80% of the country is following a religion that is literally homemade and determines how people interact with each other, organize society, get married, die. So when people come here, the cultural gap is huge. And mind you, this cultural gap is as wide in one direction as it is in the other. And nowhere is it as brutal and impactful as in the negotiation process. Now, I've identified three main obstacles in negotiation. The first one is fear, the second is language, and the third is flexibility. Fear is not the same on both sides. Very often on the Indian side, there is this fear of not getting the absolute best possible deal that can be obtained. I've seen business people who were amazing at what they were doing, but when in negotiation, they really had to squeeze that last drop out of that lemon. And that's not an entirely rational position. Actually, it's very emotional. And it has to be dealt with as such. Now, on the foreign side, the fear is of a different nature. Because there is a code when you do business, usually, at least in Europe, is that when you initiate a business relationship, everybody has to cooperate towards a common goal. We discuss together, we're all friends. You need to make money, I need to make money, you have your issues, I have my issues. We're just going to work on this together and find something that makes everybody happy so that we have something that's sustainable, durable, solid, and we're going to make money on the long term. In India, it's different. Negotiations tend to be much more competitive, where people really go for what they want and try to extract concessions one after the other. That can be very destabilizing for Europeans because this presence of the rapport of strength, where everybody is trying to really get the best out of the situation, people misunderstand it and very often see it as a hostile attitude, as a confrontational one. And sometimes they also react in a confrontational way. And when they do that, they hurt the feelings of their interlocutors for whom it was just business as usual. They know very well that once the negotiation is done, we'll get back to a more cooperative kind of interactions and things should be fine. And that's how it happens. If you get into that competitive stage, into the haggling of the negotiation, and you show that you stand your ground and that you cannot be pushed around, things settle down and you get actually through a more cooperative stage. But this idea that you first have to go through a competitive stage to reach the cooperative stage, for Europeans is quite alien. It doesn't happen like that. And many people don't get out of that because, as I said, they're afraid of it. They are far from home, they don't really understand how things function, and it also makes them feel that the future of the relationship is at stake, is threatened, because they don't really see how it's possible to work well together after going through this. Again, different ways of doing things. As a result, very often people ask me, they say, but are Indians honest? Because they find it difficult to accept the fact that honest people can be so aggressive when negotiating something. It makes them feel suspicious. My answer is always the same. I usually say, in my opinion, Indians are actually more honest than European. When I say that, it shocks many people. Oh, how can you say that? Well, if you accept the fact that honesty is defined by respecting the rules of the game, but then you also have to accept the fact that the rules here are not the same as the rules there. And you also have to take the time and the trouble to understand what those rules are. Because once you do, people actually become quite predictable. And the situations, the negotiations become much more manageable. Which leads me to the second major obstacle, which is language. Not literally, because English being mostly the language of business, there's no communication problem at that level. But people don't really understand each other. Now, I've seen it many times when Indians negotiate together. The body language, the way of interacting is actually quite codified, and people in a non-verbal way and in a verbal way tend to understand each other very well. They also know when the negotiation is over and when it's time to stop. When a foreign party is involved, those codes get messed up. They are missing, and people don't really understand each other. And the Indian side, all of a sudden, doesn't really sense when the negotiation is over and when there's actually nothing more to be obtained. And as a result, they tend to go too far and let the negotiation last too long because they still believe that they can get something out of it. And very often, I have clients who ask, but why are they still negotiating? I say, because you are. It's for you to give the signal that the negotiation is over because it's difficult for the other side to understand that. And they're afraid. And you have to manage their fear in a way that is courteous and caring so that the relationship doesn't get damaged. It can mean sometimes even leaving the room and breaking down the talks, always in a courteous way, but at some point to say, okay, look, I'm sorry, but that's what it is and I cannot go further. So you think about it. If you want us to work together, we'd be really happy to work with you. And if you don't want, it doesn't matter, it's fine. we'll remain friends, we'll work with somebody else. But that's what it is. Of course, you have to do it sensibly. You have to take the trouble to understand the market, to know your interlocutors, because if your last offer does not make enough sense in the Indian context, I've had clients who left the room and nobody ever called them back, of course. So it can be a risky move. It also takes courage, because when there's a lot at stake, it's not easy to just close the door and say, okay, I'm sorry, now I'm leaving. It takes a lot of guts, but it has to be done. And if it's done at the right moment, the best is if it's done when it's true, when there's actually nothing more to give. If it's done in a caring way, it's an important step, and the negotiation sort of gets structured around that. Quite often also, people tend to miss opportunities of closing the deal. I remember a case where a client was really stuck in the negotiation. All they could hear was no, no, no. In actual fact, there was one piece of technology that the Indian side really needed to get access to. That was not a critical technology. And when I told the client, I said, this is what you should give. And they were like, really? But that's not a problem. We can give that. It's not an issue. And so say it. But they had not really identified that because it got mixed in a variety of demands. And a negotiation, of course, is never always just about one point. And as a matter of fact, when they offered that and they said, we'd be happy to license this technology for you, all of a sudden, all the other issues fell in place and compromises were found quite easily. So it's important to be open-minded and accept the fact that others are not always expressing themselves in the way that we expect, and be attentive to different priorities, different ways of doing things. And the last point is flexibility. And flexibility is fundamental because India is a country that evolves at an incredible speed. Every year when the budget comes out, it's a national event, and it surprises people. The fact that people in the village, man of the street, is going to discuss the budget, because there are such sweeping reforms that fortunes can be made and unmade overnight. In Europe, most people are not even aware that the government is publishing a budget every year. And it is. But it's a non-event. So here, things move so quick that in actual fact, nobody can really know what India is going to look like 5 years from now. As a result, many business people, of course it depends on the sectors, but very often work on shorter targets. They need a return on investment quicker, because if you wait too long, you just don't know how things are going to turn out. And it's normal. But very often, when people want to work on the short term, European business people tend to sort of be a bit judgmental, I have to say. It's like, oh, how can you? Working on the long term is kind of a basis of how people are supposed to work. And investing on the relationship for Europeans is very important. It's at the heart of the business relation. So they will invest on the relationship and try to take care of the problems and try to, even if it means losing a bit of money sometimes, but if they see that something can threaten the relationship, they'll go to a certain length to try to repair it and preserve it. And sometimes when they see Indian partners cashing out or taking a step that is going to threaten the relationship because they're not ready to lose money at that point, they just don't understand it. And they're like, how can they do that? But the thing is that if they work on a time slot that is actually shorter, the logic is different. So that is something that can threaten deals, that can threaten partnerships very often, and that people tend to not speak about because everybody assumes that the other side is coming from the same premise. But as soon as people start to speak about these things, it becomes easier to manage. One of the factors also is that when the agreements get signed, it's a gold standard for Europeans. You start working and you don't question it. In India, there's very often a whole new side of negotiation that starts after the signature. So sometimes you have to shut it down, but sometimes you have to accept the fact that you need flexibility in the implementation, because India is also not as predictable as Europe can be. And that, well, is just a fact. And if you don't accept it, your project is also going to fall apart. So all these are things that can be very challenging to accept, but that are also very important, because business is a great motivator for people to get out of their comfort zone, to cross oceans, to meet new people, new cultures. And in the world in which we live today, we really need people to make that effort to understand different ways of thinking and to learn that the way they think is not normal, is not absolute. We live in a divided world where people with different opinions have great difficulties talking together. But I believe that if we open our mind and we accept to reset the way we see the world, at least if nothing else for the sake of building the projects that we have to build, then much more than profit is going to be gained. Because there's nothing more gratifying than realizing that the world is a little bit wider than you thought. Realizing that you understand it a little bit better than before. And that maybe you have friends that you never expected to have that are really different from you, but that are real friendships. And that really is today, I think, one of the most important challenges that we're facing. Thank you.